house and I want to get that house valued. So I go out to a surveyor and they help me out. They tell me that the house is worth 500,000. Fantastic. I buy the house and now I have an asset worth 500,000. However, when I came to buy it, I didn't quite have 500,000 of my own money to spend. I only had 200,000 of my own money, being equity value that I put in. I had to go and borrow the rest from the bank. So that gave me a mortgage of 300,000. What you might notice is that regardless of what the financing was, the house value is still 500,000. I could have had equity of 100,000 and that would have meant a mortgage of 400,000. Or I could have had equity of 250,000. That would have meant a mortgage of another 250,000. The important thing here is that both sides are the same, and the asset value, the value of the house, is not affected by the type of financing. We can use this idea when looking at a company and its enterprise value, in looking at the EV or enterprise value to equity bridge. Here we've got something called the enterprise value. This is your asset value and it's the value of the operating business. That's going to be the value of your factories, your production lines, plant, equipment, trucks, vans, inventory, anything that's involved in the actual operations of the business. But how did I finance that? Well, I may have financed some of that by equity. I could have sold some shares out to some shareholders. Where else can we get finance from? From debt holders. In this case, we call it net debt. Any cash that we've got and that's not actually being used in the operations of the business, well, we want to net that off any debt we might owe. So net debt is your debt minus cash. So how have I funded my operating business, my enterprise value? With equity and with net debt. Importantly, the value of that enterprise value is not necessarily related to the financing type. My net debt could have been much bigger and my equity value could have been much smaller. Regardless, the enterprise value wouldn't have been affected. It can often be the case that we want to find the value of a company's enterprise value. If we have a think what that enterprise value is, that's the value of the company's net operating assets. So things like factories and cars, things that actually produce products that we can sell. So I'd like to find the value of that. Why am I to do this? Well, particularly for a trading comparable, really useful in a trading comparable or transaction comparable. If the enterprise value is the value of the net operating assets, I ask myself, how has that been funded? It's been funded via debt, net debt, and equity. Now, it may be the case that I find it really easy to calculate the equity value, but I want to calculate the enterprise value. So I'm going to go from the equity value to enterprise value. How do I calculate the equity value? I take the share price times it by the number of shares. I want to go from the equity value to enterprise value. So in order to do that, I take the equity value that I've got, the number, and I add on net debt. The right-hand side of that diagram, those two boxes, must equal the left-hand side. So if I add the two on the right, equity value and net debt, I must get enterprise value. What if I want to go the other way? I want to start at enterprise value and go to equity value. Well, if I've done a DCF, a discounted cash flow, I'll have the value of the enterprise value. Maybe this company doesn't have a share price at the moment, but I'm thinking about listing it. And I want to calculate its equity value. Well, in order to get to the equity value, we'd start with the enterprise value and we would subtract net debt. And that must get me to my equity value. So depending on which way you're going, either enterprise value to equity or equity to enterprise value, be careful. You either need to add or subtract net debt.